So, in the vein of new segments, this one I'm tentatively calling Microdoses of Dysfunction. And I know I got to keep you on your toes. So, I'm thinking about them as like tiny, like subtle relationship or workplace behaviors that seem harmless in the moment, but kind of slowly scratch away at your sanity. So this is a scenario I found online, and it says my partner is brilliant at work, manages a team, solves complex problems, handles crises well. But at home, suddenly he's incompetent. If I ask him to cook, he burns water. If I ask him to grocery shop, he texts me 40 times about what kind of pasta sauce I should get. He constantly compliments me. You're so good at this stuff. I'd be lost at you. It sounds sweet, but it feels like a trap. When I confront him, he claims I'm being unfair and that he really is just that bad at domestic tasks. But how can someone who strategizes $1 million projects struggle with laundry? Is this weaponized incompetence? Is it subconscious? Is it avoidable? Is this just emotional labor imbalance? What's going on here?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's really tempting to believe that if you're good at A, you're going to be good at B. But this person sounds inexperienced and underexposed to some of these tasks. They likely, I hope, have a learning curve. I am not going to sit here and say this is weaponized incompetence. Now, that being said, that can happen. And if you have walked through and you've created opportunities and they've engaged in that learning and they still aren't doing it and are asking all the questions, then I become a little bit more suspicious. But just again, just because you're great at work with $1 million projects doesn't mean you know how, which is the better pasta sauce. You don't know even the criteria to evaluate them against.
And I'm left wondering whether these tasks are tasks that this gentleman in her life is invested in learning about.
Yes.
Like he may be very capable of learning all sorts of these things if he were desirous of becoming capable and he wanted to learn about it. He may have and by the way, I'm not excusing this. I'm saying like one of the biggest complaints I get from in heterosexual relationships from the woman in the relationship is I carry all of the mental load around everything around the house. And he comes to me and says, just ask me what to do or tell me what to do. And I'm like, well, I'd rather not tell you what to do. I'd rather you like look around and figure that shit out for yourself so that I'm not carrying that mental load in addition to doing the stuff. And I think to some degree, there's an element of it works fine the way it does for me, so I'm not troubled by it, and I don't want to learn these things. And it is time for men like this man, I think, to step up a bit and take interest in learning the tasks because he may not come naturally, but it sounds like he's quite capable.
Yeah, and I think in order to preserve the health of your relationship, that's the pivot point or that decision point then in this version of the reality, which is I don't necessarily want to learn how to make an amazing lasagna, but I do want to make my partner happy and I do
Hmm.
want to be a person who can contribute. And so while it's not my chosen area of strength, I do want to better my relationship. And that is the grist for
Hmm.
learning, not because you want to learn the thing necessarily, but you want to make your partner happier and you want to contribute to your lives together.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
would also then be curious about that division. You know, Dan, sometimes you and I have seen folks where maybe one person is highly competitively employed and spends lots of hours in the office, and the other person is really in charge of the things at home. And so, what is the perception of the balance and equity in terms of who's putting effort in and where? And I would want to explore that with this particular couple. I don't think we have nearly enough information to understand
Hmm.
the kind of dynamic. And the reality is, couplehood and partnering is really complex because
Hmm.
each each unit has their own balance of what's okay and what's not okay. And just because you or I wouldn't necessarily choose it doesn't mean it can't be really great for someone else.
No, and there's nothing wrong with couples choosing divisions of labor. Um, Sometimes,
and can be quite happy with some of those things.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there are couples I know in my business world or in my personal life, where they have like she does this and they do this and this is how we break it up. And sometimes those are conversations that have happened. Like,
Mhm.
okay, you handle this and I'll handle this. And sometimes there's things that have evolved over time, and both people like have this like agreement that they never actually agreed to, but have both sort of conspired to do, where like this one handles this and this one handles that. And if that works for the couple, that's fine. It
Mhm.
is useful to have that conversation out loud, though, because
Mhm.
sometimes one person thinks it's working great and the other person's really annoyed.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to make those conversations more explicit.
Yes. And to circle back to the scenario at hand, I just want to say I think it becomes really tempting to point to weaponized incompetence because it relieves the sometimes that tension by blaming someone else, but that tends to be, I think, a really overly negative view, and is that lens is, I think, unlikely to make anyone move and change on those behaviors
Yeah.
because now we're
This
assuming negative intent.
this reminds me a bit of our conversations about gaslighting.
Yeah.
That true gaslighting, and we've talked about this a number of times before, true gaslighting is pretty rare. Most of the time, we don't intentionally try to make our partner think that they're crazy in order to do something we want. Most of the time, we just see things differently, and it feels like gaslighting. And it's the same thing here. Like I wouldn't want to jump to weaponized intentional incompetence. It's possible, but it is more likely a lack of, I think I'm just projecting here, more likely a
Mhm.
lack of interest in learning than okay, I'll be as incompetent as possible just to make sure that I don't have to do this anymore.
Right.
I don't think most people do that kind of thing to their partner. um, but they might certainly benefit from their incompetence by not having to do things because
But
I do
far
such
more
a bad job.
passive
Yeah, yeah.
process. Mhm.
So it makes me think of a scenario, and I can't remember if I've shared this story or not, but I think of like in the business world, right? We talk about cross training. It's beneficial for more people on a team to be able to do the same skill in case there's a gap. And I remember at one point I was working at a bank, and I had a collections job, and I had to call this woman because she was severely overdrawn in her checking account. And she said, I can't be overdrawn. I still have checks in my checkbook. And I was like, that's not how a checking account works. And what I learned through this conversation, even though in the moment I laughed, was her husband had always paid the bills and he had died
Mm.
recently. And so now she was in this role where she had no understanding of how to balance a checkbook, and that the limitation is funds, not checks. And so like there's certainly, I think, in that relationship scenario, there should be a cross training. So there is a level of comfort, right? In case something happens. But um, I also understand, like you said, like you lean on the strengths for different people as well. But how would you start a conversation with these people? Like, how would you suggest she raise the conversation with her partner in this scenario where she has these thoughts and clearly she's jumping to kind of some of the worst thoughts of him? Like, is there a way to kind of step into that conversation kindly without accusation?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we want to, whenever we're having difficult conversations with a partner, we generally encourage people to start not with what our partner is doing wrong from our perspective, but what our feelings are. You know, when you text me 14 times about which pasta sauce to use, I feel frustrated. Like, I would prefer that you make the decision for yourself or do the research for yourself because this feels to me very onerous and like I don't want to shop today. I want you to shop. And it would mean a lot more to me if you just shopped, and I can accept the mistake better than I can accept the frequent phone calls. But you're seeing in each of those, you're talking about really you're focusing on what I want and what I'm feeling rather than on the other person. You're mentioning the other person for sure, but you're focusing more on your own wants or needs. Does that jive?
Yeah, no, I found that really a challenging question because very often, in our offices, we hear this, but I've addressed this with them. I've talked to them about it, and maybe it's come from kind of a harsh startup standpoint or an overly negative standpoint. And often I think people think that they have phrased it the way that you just did. And so I kind of my reaction was, I don't know, Michael, without knowing more about how this couple
Mhm.
dynamic is working. But I think
Yeah.
I think Dan's approach is a great one. It's the right way to go in terms of offering how someone's behavior is impacting you and really making this about your experience of it. And I would add that I think it's important that when we do this work, that we also remind, in this case, this woman to accept the mistake. You mentioned that, Dan, in your scenario, because very often I don't want to be texted 14 times about which pasta sauce, except you brought home the wrong one. And so now and it's like, oh, wait a second, and so really being able to say, no, whichever one you choose would be great. You really can't go wrong. If I don't like this blend because I don't know, it has soapy cilantro in it. I don't know, they really do. But I'm going to accept it. And what I'm going to say is, thank you so much for going to the store and making that decision. It really felt good to have that load taken off my plate. And if you prefer a different brand, then we can talk about that. Next time I'll make sure to put this brand on the list so that it helps, support you making a decision that I also really enjoy. I don't know, or something along those lines. But I think sometimes people find themselves in this spot because while I am in my head worried that you're weaponizing incompetence, what I'm really doing is I'm judging the job that you're doing by my standard. I wouldn't have done it that way. I don't want it done that way. And so that controllingness kind of comes in, and loading the dishwasher, washing clothes are often prime examples of these things. And our work then is to remind that other individual, yes, you may feel like you're carrying emotional load, but some of that is the load you're choosing to pick up and then carry and or voice on them. If you have a partner who's willing to pick this up, you also need to be willing to kind of let go of that and let them do it the way that they need to be able to accomplish it. You don't get to tell them exactly ABCD how to do it.
Great. Thank you. Well, hopefully that helps anyone in a similar scenario. I know weaponized incompetence is one of those like buzz phrases that is zipping around the internet.
It's very tempting to pick up and slap that label on and really offload the responsibility.